Welcome to Nat Chat. I'm Chris Field. This week we have the privilege of speaking with Gary Bates, the author of this book, Alien Intrusion. Gary has studied UFOs and gone to a whole lot of trouble to put together a lot of insights into what's involved in that fascinating subject matter. And if that's of interest to you, you're watching at the right time. Gary, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
It's an impressive looking book, quite big, and you've obviously got a lot to say about aliens. How long have you had a fascination for this sort of subject?
Well, I suppose I'm a science fiction junkie from my childhood, like most people today. My generation, I've grown up with the whole Star Wars, Star Trek type phenomenon, and you know, in our sort of modern technological age, it's revealed insights about the universe that probably generations before mine didn't understand, and so it's created a lot of intrigue.
So is this a science fiction oriented book, or is it a scientific book? No,
I think it's a layperson's book, and it tries to cover the whole gamut. I mean, it looks at the major defining events of ufology, you know, Roswell incident, crop circles, all of those types of things that people may have heard of, and it tries to give solid answers to those. At the same time, to make it interesting, it has science fiction snippets. Every now and then we divert, and there might be a little box in the book that'll give you a movie review of you know, The Day the Earth Stood Still, or Signs the movie.
Forbidden Planet. I remember watching that when I was a boy. So what are some of the things that you discovered as you went through this?
Well, it's interesting. Most people tend to view the subject matter of UFOs or aliens really depending on their worldview. I mean, people say to me, you know, Gary, do you believe in UFOs? And I say, well, of course I do, because what's a UFO? A UFO is an unidentified flying object. But in the common vernacular, what really people mean is, you know, do you believe in a UFO? Do you believe in flying saucers, you know, being piloted by alien spacemen or something like that? And the reason we interpret, you know, those lights in the sky as maybe being alien spacemen is because of a whole range of things that we're processing basically. Today, as I said, you know, I was brought up in a science fiction age, and so there's a groundswell there of, you know, watching those types of movies where you think, well, maybe there could be something out there. Now, you'd get the die-hard skeptic, you know, maybe the atheist, and he says, well, you know, it's physically impossible for aliens to travel millions of light years across the universe, so therefore he says every UFO sighting or everybody who says they've had an abduction experience with an alien must be a psychological delusion, or those UFOs must be explained as natural or man-made phenomena. So you can't physically, empirically test UFOs. You know, you can't put a UFO in a test tube and find out what it is. We're not able to do that. That's why they remain unidentified. So people tend to form an opinion based upon their worldview.
Well, as you followed this through, and I understand you've checked out the historical development of sort of the way we perceive and understand UFOs, has there been a shift even in the scientific community or in the more serious observers of these things in their understanding of what's going on?
Absolutely. I think particularly in the 50s and the 60s, again, as our understanding about the universe grew, at the same time there seemed to be an explosion of UFO sightings. In fact, 1947 was a very, very defining event. A man named Kenneth Arnold was flying his light plane over Mount Rainier in Washington, and he said he saw 9 shaped discs following his aircraft. And he said they looked like saucers skipping across the water. And that is actually the genesis of the term flying saucer, where it came from.
So before 1947, the talk of flying saucers as such was nowhere near so
Not flying saucers, but UFOs were still common. There was an airship wave in the 1896, 1898, and what it appears is that UFOs seem to appear within the understanding of the culture of the time. UFOs in the late 1800s appeared like airships. The ancient Romans and Greeks have stories of flying shields with occupants on board. American Indians have legends of flying canoes with people on board. And as we approached our rocket age, if you like, we started to take on these silvery, shiny types of shapes. The interesting thing is, history will show in the modern age that 90 to 95% of all UFOs can be explained as either natural or man-made phenomena. Believe it or not, the most common mistaken UFO is the planet Venus.
Really? Yeah.
It accounts for 27% of all sightings. But one of the reasons we would look up and see things like the planet Venus and say, oh, maybe it's a UFO, is because of that preconditioning we've had. Can you imagine 150 years ago, a farmer's in his field putting his cows to bed one night and he sees a strange light circling the sky? Well, he's never seen a rocket ship. He's never seen even probably a weather balloon or a motor car. So he would not understand that as being something of a technological development or
He just assumed it
perspective.
was something in the heavens, as it were.
Yeah, he might say it was an angel or a demon because people were probably more religiously disposed. But if a person today, that farmer putting his cows to bed in the field today and he saw a strange light, first thing he'd say is, oh, UFO. And what he really means is spaceship, alien spaceship.
Now tell me, what is a ufologist? It is a science, is it? The actual study of UFOs?
No, it's not something you go to university and get accreditation in, although I know one man by the name of Dr. David Jacobs is the only man in the world to receive his PhD with a UFO dissertation. But it is a serious field of endeavour, and people, I suppose I classify as a ufologist because I've spent many, many years studying the subject matter. So he's just somebody that studies UFOs.
You told me before we went recording that when Spielberg made his movie, the
Close
Encounters, he actually had ufologists or whatever advising him on how that all worked.
Yeah. Well, the lead character in the movie was a Frenchman. I think the character's name was Lacombe, but it was based upon a real ufologist by the name of Jacques Vallée. I would rate him as probably the number 2 ufologist in the world. And he was a contemporary of another gentleman called Dr. J. Allen Hynek. They're both physical scientists. In fact, Hynek makes a little cameo at the end of the movie. Spielberg pays homage to him when the flying saucer lands and you see this man with glasses and a beard holding his pipe, sort of rubbing his brow. That's actually J. Allen Hynek. And those two gentlemen were collaborators. And the movie was actually based around sort of their research and the mysterious things that they'd found out. In fact, Hynek, even more interestingly, was a government researcher for the US government under a project called Blue Book. The US government has investigated UFOs for over 40 years in different projects. And he found that, the majority could be explained naturally or as either man-made phenomena, but he said there was a mysterious element that defied naturalistic explanation. These craft have been seen to change shapes. They defy the laws of physics. American fighter pilots have gone up, seen these balls of light and shot at them, and they've disappeared before their eyes. They've disappeared off radar screens. So as a physical scientist, he said, well, there's a mystery there that I need to solve. And so he started his own UFO investigation organisation.
You've read their material, or you went through that research material as part of your own study. And did it seem to you to make sense? Did you find it easy to come to conclusions, or is it a particularly confusing subject overall?
Well, I think here we have to talk about people's worldviews, if I could mention that for a moment. See, what I've come to learn is that everybody has a worldview, and even though we don't realise we've got a worldview, I believe that people's worldviews, which is like a set of glasses, a filter, if you like, for which we view the world around us, is pretty much determined by where you think you came from. Now, I'm a Christian. I believe the Bible to be a real record of history, not a book of myth and fairy tales. And so, because of my Christian faith, I already believe that there is a spiritual dimension to our existence. And now, for somebody who might not believe in the supernatural or a spiritual element, he has to try to explain UFOs within the physical bounds, if you like, of our existence. But what the people like Hynek and Vallée found out, and people can do the research themselves, it's not little Joe Christian here saying this, is that they were confronted with what they described as a paranormal or paraphysical phenomena. I mean, how can a nuts and bolts spacecraft, two objects that are supposed to be made of metallic steel, fly into each other at thousands of kilometres an hour, become one object and then fly off in another direction? How can UFOs be seen to accelerate to the ground, at terrific speeds and do a U-turn and go upwards without even slowing down? If there were real occupants in there, they'd be splattered.
The summary or the assumption that has been made by people is that they have some technology that's just vastly beyond ours.
Yeah, that's true. And because, the majority of people probably believe in evolution, they think, well, evolution may have occurred elsewhere in the universe and they could be advanced and older and all that type of stuff. But the problem is, Chris, you're really getting into the realms of science fiction. I mean, science fiction is actually fantasy. That's what we need to understand. And you've got to defy the laws of physics to be able to do those things. Now, you can't defy the laws of physics.
And so it was that reference, that scientific anchor, as it were, of what is physically real, that led these guys that were ufologists into basically recognising that this had to be paranormal.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so this was their scientific assessment. This wasn't your assessment. That was what they came up with.
That's right. And I believe with someone like J. Allen Hynek, it pained him to admit that. In fact, it was confronting for him that there was an element here that he would not be able to explain empirically, if you like, as a scientist. He had to be confronted with the idea that there could be other dimensions, for example.
So if somebody came rushing in saying, I've seen a UFO, I've seen a UFO, one assumption is they've seen something physical and real, but Heineken, is his name? Heineck recognised that what they were seeing was very likely not a nuts and bolts physical object. Okay.
Yeah.
So where does that lead us to then?
Well, it leads us to the conclusion, and I think pretty much those...
should we assume that people are crazy? I mean, that would be the next assumption, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I've met people, lots and lots of them, who've seen UFOs. Most of the places where I talk, in fact, without exception, people come up and tell me about the UFO experience. So millions and millions of people have seen them.
Some of the people watching this program will say, I've seen one of those things, and do you think they're crazy?
No, not at all.
You don't think they're crazy?
No.
For all your study of UFOs and all the research you've done, you don't think people watching this show that have seen UFOs are crazy at all?
Not at all.
Well, then we want to look more at this because obviously our viewers are going to be interested to know exactly what you do think it's all about. So we're going to take a break. And Gary, after this, we're going to come back and find out some more. So we will take a quick break. Be back with you shortly to find out more about UFOs. If you've got other friends that you can call to watch the program, grab them right now. You might be very fascinated by the rest of this program. See you soon. Welcome back to Nat Chat. I'm Chris Field, and we're speaking now with Gary Bates, the author of this fascinating book called Alien Intrusion. And Gary, it's been great having you on the program so far. Fascinating material. We're going to talk in a moment about what people have seen and experienced in seeing UFOs. But before we do that, people can find out about this book and about what you found on a website that you have. What's that?
Well, you'll be able to find it, I think, in most Christian bookstores, but you can get it on Amazon.com.
This book is available at Amazon.com.
That's right. In fact, it's actually been an Amazon Top 50 bestseller. We have our own website, the ministry that I work for, Creation Ministries International. Their website is simply creationontheweb.com. There's a bookstore. But if people specifically want to have a look at this subject matter, there's a website called alienintrusion.com. And there's a whole heap of fun and games on there and some links where people can get books and DVDs as well.
Okay, so the book is called Alien Intrusion by Gary Bates, and it's alienintrusion.com.
Yep.
And people can go and find out more about
right.
the subject. Well, we're going to find out some more right now. What are the common encounters or experiences that people have with UFOs? Obviously, sightings is a big one.
Yes, and it's interesting. Just as in the movie Close Encounters, there are strange phenomena that accompany it. Animals get spooked, sometimes there are electrical outages, etc. But I think the area where we can really unpick what's happening, if there are UFOs and aliens, for example, from other planets, is at the level of abductions. And this I found was particularly confronting to me. And I have to be honest that when I approached the subject matter, I thought at the level of abductions, perhaps people were really having psychological delusions.
Well, now, way back when I was only a teenager, there were full-blown stories of this couple driving across the desert and they couldn't remember hours and hours of their time. And then when they went into hypnosis, that revealed all sorts of things. Back in those days, I was under the impression that was a very rare phenomenon. Is that a rare phenomenon?
No.
It's not?
No. In fact, there have been polls conducted, Gallup polls, one poll called the Roper poll. The results were extrapolated and sent to over 150,000 American GPs, medical practitioners. That basically said it's almost at epidemic proportions. They estimate that up to 4 million Americans may have had an alien abduction experience, as they believe.
Wow. So people watching this program, there may be many that would say, I have been abducted by aliens. Now, do most people know that that's happened to them, or do they have to discover that by hypnosis or by some other means?
Well, sometimes, usually what happens, as you mentioned, there are periods of missing time. People might remember some strange object or entity or strange being, a cloud or something in their room, and then after that they don't remember too much. But usually what happens is what I call an activating event. They might be watching a TV program and it might be talking about aliens or something, and it triggers something wrong. Sometimes they have markings on them. Sometimes they have bruises or something like this that they can't account for. But usually there's something that they find is troubling them. Now,
Is it possible for people to have had an alien abduction experience and actually remember it firsthand, everything that happened?
yeah, sometimes that is the case. Yeah, but I have to say it is quite rare. And then you've really got to wonder, why is the nature of it so deceptive? You know, if they're really here to help us, as some of these contacts claim, you know, why do they go around acting deceptively? Why do they stealthily abduct people in the middle of the night? And, you know, when I say it was confronting, there was some subject matter that was particularly disturbing. You know, people claim they've been taken onto a spaceship and probed in all parts of their bodies. There are sexual encounters. There seems to be some sort of almost ritual abuse that's going on. So you've got to ask, why would advanced, you know, evolved creatures, you know, kidnap people in the middle of the night and do these horrible things to them, and yet say, you know, we're here to help you evolve? And it's interesting that, you know, we'd like to apply, if you like, a scientific tag to it. But quite simply, it seems that these creatures claim that they fly millions of light years across the universe to basically deny the Bible, Christianity, and teach us almost New Age beliefs. Because they basically say, you know, you and I are going to be like gods or something like this, and they're helping us to try to, you know, evolve into some spiritual aspect.
Okay, now we want to delve into what you think is an explanation for all of this. But wouldn't it be interesting to just consider the solar system that we have and where these people could really have come from anyway? Has anyone done any research on that area?
Well, NASA are spending billions of dollars on the search for extraterrestrial life. I mean, there's 2 rovers on Mars at the moment. They're very excited about finding water, because where they think there's going to be water, there's life. But if you know anything about genetics, you know, you need more than just add water for life to occur. Water is H2O. In the DNA of every human being, Chris, you know, there's DNA is a molecule of which information is written on. It tells the cells what to build. And that information, you know, it's like a sequence, if you like, of letters, or an order of letters, an arrangement of letters. We've got about 1,000 books worth of information. And all of those letters have to be arranged to tell the cells to build a human being or a frog or a fish or whatever it's going to be. And, you know, to sort of say, well, you know, there's life on other planets, we might find some microbes or something like that, is a far cry from saying that you're coming across advanced extraterrestrial races that are capable of defying the laws of physics.
But what if they come from just further and further away? Is that possible?
Well, you've got this speed of light travel problem. The speed of light is 300,000 kilometres every second. Einstein theorised, and there's every good reason to believe that he's correct, that it's the maximum speed limit in the universe. Quite simply, as your speed increases, your mass increases. As you approach the speed of light, your mass becomes infinite. You've got to convert every atom in the universe to energy to try to get to the speed of light. In other words, it's impossible. Let's just look at some of the physical problems. It's estimated there's about 100,000 particles of dust for every cubic kilometre of space. And if you were travelling in a spaceship at even 1/10 of the speed of light and you hit a grain of dust, it would be like 10 tonnes of TNT going off inside the spaceship. Now, science fiction to the rescue, because if you've ever watched Star Trek, they have, you know, deflector arrays, and they've got inertial dampers so you don't get splattered up on the wall when you do U-turns at warp factor 9 and that type of thing. But that's my point, it's science fiction.
It is science fiction, yeah. It makes great movies. What about distance?
Well, distance is a huge problem. I mean, within our own Milky Way galaxy, the next nearest star to us, Proxima Centauri, is 4.3 light years away. Now, at the best speed we can muster now, I went to the Kennedy Space Center last year, and the space shuttle and the Apollo craft that sent man to the moon are the most powerful vehicles we've ever built. And at their speed, it would take you 870,000 years to reach the next nearest star in our own Milky Way galaxy. Once you leave our galaxy and you travel out into space, the next galaxy, Andromeda, would take you 2 million years. That's if you could travel at the speed of light. And the next one after that, 20 million years. And when you think about those galaxies, it's estimated that there are hundreds of billions of galaxies in the universe. So, you know, they've got to come increasingly from farther and farther.
So we can put the skids on the idea that aliens are material nuts and bolts creatures for 2 reasons. The scientists that have looked at it said that it just doesn't fit normal physics. It's paranormal in that sense. And there simply is not the capacity for these people to be coming from some other place and getting here in anything like the kind of time frame that would be possible with physics. So what are we dealing with here?
Yeah. Well, just on that physics thing, if I could explain. See, some people might object to that because they'd say, well, hang on, you know, we're not a billion years advanced like some of these aliens. Who's to say they might not be able to build those types of craft? But the reality is you're resorting to unknowns. You're trying to use something that is not verifiable and testable to explain it. And that's really an unscientific method. You can only deal with the real world that you know, and the real world that we know can't do that. Let me just talk about abductions, because as I said, that's where I think we can unpick it. People that claim these abduction experiences say that little grey entities enter their room in the middle of the night and they see them pass through the walls, or they see them enter through the ceiling. And then these people who believe that they've had some real physical experience claim they're taken through the walls. Now, you and I know that can't be happening, but these people are having a real experience. But the question is it really aliens? Now, my conclusion there is I don't believe it is. I mentioned before that I believe as a Christian there is a spiritual dimension to our existence. As non-Christians would use the word paranormal, supernatural, paraphysical, those types of things. And you know, as I said, that was the evidence they're confronted with. But here's the interesting thing: these people that have contacts, and you can pretty much find out whether they're genuine or not, you know, because they form a pattern of events. They're told very, very interesting stories. People are told that they're special, they've been chosen, go off and do a mission, something like this. And they always seem to have some sort of religious connotation. And again, you don't have to take my word for it, go and have a look at the research. Why would advanced extraterrestrials come just to teach us religious messages? And it seems to me, and again the researchers will show you, that the messages being received are deceptive in nature. They will tell you things like, well, you know, we've come from Venus or Mars in the 60s, that was the messages. Well, we now know that's impossible. Now they say they come from Sirius or Orion or Zeta Reticuli or somewhere far off, where we can't test those claims. And that's the problem. And some of the stories they've told us, like that, we know to be demonstrably not true. And if someone comes to you, Chris, and tells you a story and does all these things and says, I'm here to help you, but then does brutal things to you and then lies to you, then I don't think trust is a good place to start.
So you're telling me that you would see these aliens as such as some kind of spiritual phenomena that is not in fact coming here to benefit us. They're not from outer space coming here to enrich the human experience. They are of some sort of a religious nature.
I believe they're interdimensional, and again, that fits my Christian perspective, because I would believe that the spiritual dimension, if you like, you can call it an interdimension or another dimension, so it is interdimensional as well. The Bible talks about beings called angels, and most people have a view of angels, for example, as being, you know, some sort of fairy type creature with, you know, angel wings out the side or something like that. But actually, when you look at the Bible, it's never ever recorded like that. Angels appear as real, almost physical beings. They've interacted with human beings. You know, they've harmed them in some cases. The Bible is full of accounts like that. So they can interact physically in our reality, yet they seem to be able to be flit in and out of our reality as well.
Gary, fantastic. So here we are, we're looking at the alien intrusion, and you're basically coming up with the conclusion that this is the same old spiritual realities people have dealt with maybe for thousands upon thousands of years.
Well, it's interesting. The movers and shakers that I mentioned pretty much will tell you the same thing, that it mirrors what they call supernatural or demonic events in some cases that have been known to parapsychologists and theologians for many hundreds of years.
Gary, thanks for that. If you want to know more about what Gary's on about, Alien Intrusion is the book. It's an Amazon bestseller, and you'll find that a great and fascinating read, as you've discovered from us talking today. Gary, thank you for your time, and thanks for being with us here on Nat Chat. Let's look forward to meeting you again next time. Welcome to Spirit of Life. I'm Chris Field. And this week we have the privilege of interviewing Gary Bates, the author of this fascinating book, Alien Intrusion. Gary's going to talk to us about his spiritual journey and how he came to write a book such as this. So Gary, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So you're full-time involved in Christian activity. What were you doing before you were ever involved in Christian?
I was a self-employed businessman. I've mainly come from a retail background. I've been in corporate management, those types of things, and but been actively involved for many years before I joined the ministry full-time, working for them as a volunteer.
So before you were a Christian then, what was your orientation? How would you describe yourself?
Well, as a non-Christian, probably, I was probably an agnostic for most of my time. And then finally reached the position where I said there was no God. I looked at all, what I perceived as inhumanity, injustice in the world. Probably the most asked question today people have: if there's a God of love, how does he allow all the death and suffering in the world? They were things that I found Christians couldn't answer for me. And so, although I'd been brought up, of that generation or ilk where we still sang hymns at morning assembly and prayers and those types of things, I'd been brought up, if you like, in a Christian environment. Probably in my young adulthood, I finally came to the conclusion and said, there's no God, that's it. And it was amazing. It was almost like the minute I said that, things started to change.
So you would have been an evolutionist, basically, at that point?
Yeah, that was the big stumbling block for me. I've always been a bit of a science nerd and had an interest. Particularly at school, I liked dolphins, sharks. I suppose I call myself a bit of an ichthyologist, and
Why that fascination? Why go that way?
Well, I suppose young boys like gory things, fierce creatures that tear other creatures apart. People are fascinated with dinosaurs. I chose sharks, and sharks were described in all the literature that I read as being the pinnacle of evolution, the perfect eating machine developed and honed over 270 million years of evolution.
You make them sound exciting.
Yeah, so that's what I was really, taking in hook, line and sinker. And so when I came to a point of, problems in my life where I was looking for meaning and searching for answers, I investigated initially the concept of Christianity from what I understood as a child, and then basically rejected that. And one of the reasons I rejected that is when I looked at the Bible, I saw what I perceived to be an incompatibility with what I was taught about science and the real world. Sharks, for example, evolution, millions of years. If you take the Bible at natural face value, right there in the very, very first book, it says God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. And I believe that, when you read it, and the Hebrew scholars will tell you, it means 24-hour days. That's incompatible with most of the stuff that we're taught at school. Either evolution's correct, and if it is, the Bible's wrong, or it's the other way around. Like, both are not, I believe, mutually compatible with one another.
So how did you actually cross that divide yourself between the contradiction between evolution and Christianity?
Well, the compulsion to become a Christian was overwhelming. I had experiences in my life that really led me to the conclusion that there was a spiritual dimension to our existence. And, on bended knee, basically confessed, and gave my life to the Lord. But within weeks, I became troubled almost immediately because of this evolutionary problem. As I started to read my Bible, as I was encouraged to do by fellow Christians, I started to go to them with questions. How did Noah get all the animals on the ark? What about distant starlight, millions of light years away? If the Bible indicates maybe creation was only about 6,000 years ago, how am I going to deal with those things? And immediately what I did was start to reinterpret the book of Genesis based on what I'd been taught at school. Maybe those days could be millions or billions of years or something like that. Now, on the surface, they might sound like plausible explanations, but the problem I had is what I was doing is I was reinterpreting Scripture. And it led me on a rocky road, or a slippery slope perhaps, better described, because I thought, well, maybe the Bible doesn't mean that. Maybe it means this, maybe it means that. And within a short period of time,
you lose all your confidence in what the Bible's actually saying.
Maybe Jesus really didn't rise from the dead. How could he turn water into wine?
How old were you at this time? A young adult?
Young adult, early 20s.
Early 20s. And so how long did you end up going through this process of sorting these things through?
Fortunately, not very long. I was listening to a Christian radio station one day, and I heard about a lecture coming up. I'm from Perth. That's where all this happened. And this guy was talking about, evolution in the Bible. And he talked about the events of Mount St. Helens, a volcanic explosion in Washington State in 1980. And, you know, why is this important for the millions of years of so-called evolution and uniformitarian ideas where we see the present as the key to the past? And I went along to that lecture, packed with 600 people, I remember it at Wesley College in Perth, and hadn't heard anything like it. Just completely blew my ideas about where I came from right out of the water.
What made that significant? Was it the fact that there was a scientific alternative to popularised science?
Absolutely. In fact, what people don't understand, you see, we confuse the type of science, you know, the type of science that builds TV studios, for example, where technology is built upon itself through investigation and endeavour and repeatable experiments. Compare that to the type of science what people call evolution, which actually is really a belief system about the past. You and I cannot go back in a time machine and test what happened in the past. All we have is evidence in the present. You know, we have fossils. How did those fossils get there? How did they form? You've got to extrapolate backwards, and you don't know what those conditions may have been like in the past. And I started to understand that origin science or historical science, you know, it's maybe people have watched CSI or those programs, it's a bit like forensic science in one respect. What do? They come along and they investigate a crime scene, there's the evidence. They start to make up stories about the evidence to try to prove their theory. And what I learnt is there are only two ways really at looking how the world, the universe, you and I came to be. There's evolution or there's creation. They're the only two that's still around today. And what I've learnt is the evidence does not speak for itself. If you're an evolutionist, you will interpret the evidence, you'll interpret rock layers already according to your worldview and your belief about the past. If you're a Christian, a creationist, you can interpret it within the biblical context. Creationists, evolutionists, we all have the same evidence, the same facts.
But they come to different conclusions.
Different conclusions.
Well, then why, you mentioned this Mount St Helens eruption that took place, was it 1980?
1980.
25 years ago or so, 20 years. What made that significant in terms of the evolutionary issue?
Well, the idea of the millions and billions of years that people are familiar with the age of the Earth and the universe, people think it's to do with radiometric dating or something like that. It's not. Actually, the millions of years comes from the rock layers. Now, I was taught at school that things like the Grand Canyon, we've all seen pictures of the Grand Canyon, you've got all those layers, those coloured layers in the side of the canyon. And within those wide bands, you've got finite bands called sedimentary layers. And these layers, it's believed, are laid down by water or moving fluid processes, maybe one per year. So when you look at the canyon, you see billions of layers, and they say, well, the canyon's billions of years old. And then you take that Colorado River winding its way through the canyon. I was told that it had been occurring for over 500 million years and had slowly eroded the canyon. But what I saw at Mount St. Helens in documentary and moving footage were, for example, you know, areas where there are you know, meters and meters of sediment, thousands of layers, these fine layers that were laid down in a matter of hours by the rapid catastrophic, you know, events of Mount St. Helens erupting. You go back to that area today, you can see little rivers and streams running through canyons in Mount St. Helens. Now, because we've all been evolutionised, you might think, wow, you know, that stream has ebbed and flowed in the past and maybe has eroded the canyon. Actually, no, the canyon, and one of them called Engineers Canyon, was created because engineers diverted water from a nearby lake called Spirit Lake as a result of the volcanic explosion that had overfilled. They diverted the water into a little gully and eroded a canyon in a matter of 8 months.
And that canyon looks very much like a Grand Canyon kind of scenario.
Yeah, almost like a mini Grand Canyon. Okay. So these things happen quickly, catastrophically, and isn't it very interesting, even though I was taught as fact at school that the Grand Canyon took millions of years of slow gradual processes, evolutionary geologists are now saying, as a result of things they see like Mount St. Helens, that maybe Grand Canyon was formed quickly and catastrophically. Some people propose there was an inland sea that breached and could have carved out the canyon in a very, very short space of time.
So this would have undermined your overall confidence in science overall, or just in science to do with origins?
Science to do with origins. In fact, I initially felt quite angry. I felt like I'd been cheated. You know, I felt like as a human being, as an individual, I should have had a right to all of the information. And what it felt like to me is I'd only ever been given one view of events. See, Chris, if we were to go out in the street there and ask somebody, you know, informally and say, do you think that you're the product of an evolved ape or something like this? You know, do you think that evolution is true, or do you think that there's a creator who brought the world into existence? Most people would say, well, I think evolution is true. But if you scratched underneath the surface and said, well, how do you know that? What research have you done? How have you investigated it? Pretty much the answer would be, well, that's because of what I was taught. That's what I learned. Somebody told me that, and that's what the majority of people believe. I mean, I had a guy come to me one day after a meeting and he said, "Gary, what about fossils? Just the process of fossilisation takes millions of years. So how can you think that the Earth is only thousands of years old? Fossils take millions of years to form." And I said to him, "Well, that's interesting. Are you interested in fossils? Can I ask what you know about them? Is there a particular fossil you got a problem with?" Of course, he couldn't name me a fossil. That was his general belief about it. But actually, when you dig deeper, fossils can be formed very, very quickly. At Creation Ministries, we can show you fossils that have been formed very, very rapidly. In my home state of WA, we've got and it's in the office now in Brisbane, but we collected it when we were over there, a solid rock ring, about 3/4 of a metre high. And what happened, it was exposed at a low tide up in Shark Bay, Monkey Mire, the World Heritage Area up the coast. When we got it down to Perth, we broke it open. It was a roll of fossilised fencing wire. And you can even see the individual strands of wire in there. Now that took less than 50 years to become basically a piece of stone.
So all of that then has caused you to rethink your orientation, has actually drawn you into a place where you're actively involved in Christian ministry around all that sort of stuff. So let's take it a bit further and find out where that journey's taken you. We'll do that after this break. So in just a moment we're back to talk more with Gary Bates about how he became the author of The Alien Intrusion. See you soon. Welcome back to Spirit of Life. I'm Chris Field. We're speaking with Gary Bates, the author of UFO Intrusion. So Gary, thanks for being on the program. And we were talking a bit about your journey, and you made reference to the issue of becoming angry. What did that mean?
Well, I felt like I'd been deceived and I'd only been given one view of origins. A view of origins is very important because where you think you came from will ultimately determine where you think you're going, how you think you got here, where you're going to, etc. And because I hadn't been given access to all of the information, I found that there was another view of origins, another view of how the world, the universe came to be. I felt rather annoyed by that, and so that's why I became passionate about being involved, initially as a volunteer with Creation Ministries, about trying to get the message out there to others.
So Creation Ministries is specifically focused on helping people understand that the view of origins is not necessarily scientific, and that to bring what is the information about science to bear on the subject.
Well, not strictly correct. I mean, I wouldn't say it's unscientific. That's one of the accusations people make. I work with scientists every day in the office, PhDs, real scientists that work in the real world. It's the interpretations of science. That's the difference.
And this is particularly to do with origins.
Origins, yes, yeah. I mean, and that's interpreted, according to your worldview, as I say, where you think you came from. So yes, that's become, my quest. We are an information ministry. That's typically what we do. We go out and we hold meetings, public meetings, we visit churches and try to assist Christians in understanding. One of the great problems today, I believe, in the church is that Christians don't necessarily believe their own book. So it makes it very, very hard when you're trying to share your faith with others and somebody comes up to you and says, "Chris, where did Cain get his wife? How are you going to answer those things? What about the millions of years of evolution? What about life on other planets?" The subject of that book. Most Christians, I've found, will take a step back and resolve because we don't know the answers and say, well, come to Jesus. But if we can't meet people's most basic, objections, if you like. See, I actually look at it the other way. I think those questions are an opportunity. A lot of Christians say, well, as soon as you mention Jesus or God, they take a step backwards and walk away. Well, I say, if they're asking you questions, you can use those questions as an opportunity to engage people.
So if someone's watching this right now and they say, okay, they're questions that I want answers to or that my family or friends want answers to, do they have to ring you up to get that answer? Where do they get the answer from?
Well, the information is available on our website. It's free, called creationontheweb.com, all one word, creationontheweb.com. And there's a bar across the top with some links, and click on the info bar. Frequently asked questions there. There's over 4,500 searchable articles on site. Where did Cain get his wife? What about dinosaurs? What about carbon-14 dating, etc.? That's free. That's free there. We are a ministry.
And so your job is to help improve that information, collect that information, disseminate that information, I presume.
That's exactly what.
So what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, we have an office to run. My position there is head of ministry, so I oversee the organisation of some 600 speaking events around Australia each year. We've got offices in South Africa, New Zealand and Canada, affiliate ministries there. Managing director is now at the moment in Canada doing a tour, helping the ministry there. We recently did a tour in South Africa. I'm off to New Zealand later this year. In the last 18 months, I've had 2 world trips talking in various countries about my book. So, trying to enlighten Christians that they can trust the Bible.
Well, let's come to your book, because you're talking initially about origins, evolution, rocks and fossils. And here you're writing about aliens and things like that. What's the connection?
Well, simply to give answers. One of the most asked questions we get today is, is there life on other planets, for example? A lot of that comes from the media. Science fiction, Chris, would you believe, is the #1 entertainment genre of today, bar none. Star Trek, the TV program, is the most syndicated watched television show in the history of the planet. And polls show, and we've done informal surveys at school, that in fact the #1 view amongst public or secular high school kids today is that aliens could be our creators. This is becoming an increasingly popular view with scientists today. They're confronted with all this information on the DNA of every living creature, and they say it speaks of an intelligence. It's put it there. But they don't necessarily think about a creator God of the Bible. Maybe it could be advanced aliens, millions of light years away, who came here and seeded life on Earth or something like that. So our ministry aims to give answers, and this is a really, really hot topic. In fact, I've found this opens doors like you wouldn't believe. People are fascinated by the subject.
I'm sure you want people to buy your book, but what does it say? Give us a summary of what it actually teaches.
Well, it looks at the whole UFO phenomena from a historical perspective, brings us up to date. It looks at those individual defining events of ufology, the Roswell incident, crop circles. It talks about alien abductions. And what it reveals is that we're really dealing not with the nuts and bolts phenomena. And this is not my research, if you like. This is the collation of the movers and shakers who've worked for many, many years, empirical scientists, not necessarily Christians, who have basically said that they're not dealing with a real physical phenomena. They're dealing with something that is interdimensional, paraphysical, paranormal. But of course, as a Christian, we're told we need to discern things spiritually. My explanation is it's a spiritual one.
So your book scientifically and intelligently puts the case that what we are encountering in the alien intrusions, alien observations around the world is very, very likely a good old-fashioned spiritual manifestation.
Yeah, and in fact it's been confronting for some of those non-Christian scientists to actually say that what they're dealing with is actually also deceptive. People having these experiences in the middle of the night that are not really beneficial to them. The idea that benevolent extraterrestrials are coming to fix holes in our ozone and etc., quite frankly, is a nonsense. They harm people, they hurt people, just like those accounts of demonology and spiritual forces in the Bible. And that's what they've said. They've said that these resemble and mirror accounts in history, written down in history, of people having encounters with supernatural beings.
If people want to know more about that subject specifically, you've got an alien intrusion website of some sort.
That's right, yeah.
So what's that?
Yeah, that's called alienintrusion.com. Very simple, alienintrusion.com. There are dozens of links on there. There's some pictures on the side. You just click on them. You'll get a fast fact about UFOs. It's designed to be an interactive site. There's audio files there. People can download some interviews with myself, and people can get the book. There's even some stickers they can get and put on their car.
Okay. So we've gone from rocks all the way through to spaceships. Where does that take Gary Bates?
Well, there's a lot more to be done. And, it's amazing where we talk in churches and we talk about origins. It's just amazing how the scales fall off people's eyes, just like it did with me. They realise that they're only receiving one source of information. The main thing it does, and what I'm excited about, Chris, is it motivates people. Christians, the last, I think, Church Life survey had a few questions in there, and it said, to Christians, do you believe the Bible is the Word of God, contains the Word of God, is not the Word of God? And I'm simplifying it here, but the majority of Christians in Australia today believe that the Bible just contains the Word of God. Now there's a problem. Which parts are truth and which parts are not? So I think it's a package deal. You've got to believe either all of it or none of it. If the very, very first book right back there, Genesis, is not a real account of history, even Jesus himself said, if you're not going to believe me on earthly things, how are you going to believe me when I speak of heavenly things or spiritual things?
In the process of all of that, then you've probably come to look at the Christian church maybe a bit more critically, a little bit more carefully than other people would. What's your take on the church in Australia at the moment?
Well, Jesus said we should be salt and light to the culture. I don't view that critically. I think that our culture has changed. Gone are the days when we can just say, come to Jesus, because your generation, my generation, we were shipped off to Sunday school. We had a Christian foundation that was laid. People today, the new generation, don't have that Christian foundation. Jesus is a swear word. Who is he? Some mythological figure. So they don't necessarily respond to just hearing about Jesus. We need to let them know that, in fact, there was a very good creation that's been marred by sin, our rebellion, and we're helpless. Here you and I are on this mud ball spinning in space. What are we going to do to save ourselves? There's nothing. And yet God loves us so much that he sent a rescue mission, from outer space, if you like, to come and save us. We messed up his beautiful world, but yet he does love us so much that he came to this earth to save us. I think that's an incredible story of love.
And do you think that the Christian church is ready to take that message to the rest of Australia?
Absolutely. Where we go, we find always, without exception, we have an incredible response to this message, because people have not heard this very, very basic information before.
And how do ordinary people get involved? People who are not scientists and don't necessarily know all the answers, how could they get involved in doing the sort of things you're doing?
Well, within your own church. Why don't you just ask your church if they would be willing to host a meeting with Creation Ministries? Go to our website, we've got contact phone numbers there. They can ring up and say, hey, look, can we have one of your speakers? We've got 11 speakers that go around Australia and around the world talking on this subject. They're layperson communicators.
And all of this is free of charge, isn't it?
Well, we normally ask that we're allowed to put our book tables out so people can buy the information. And it's, if you want to buy it, you buy it. If you don't, you don't.
creationontheweb.com. So anyone who wants to contact you or know more about all of this can go there. alienintrusion.com, was
yes.
it? .com. You've got to get the right dot at the end. .com for more information about
sure.
aliens. Gary, thanks for coming and talking to us about these issues. It's great to talk to people about how they got to be where they are and how God has brought them there. And so we do appreciate that. We've been speaking with Gary Bates, who's involved in the whole issue of explaining and answering questions about creation and our origins. I trust you found that interesting. We're looking forward to meeting you next time on Spirit of Life.
Spirit of God, every man's heart is lonely, watching and waiting and hungry until Spirit of God, man longs that you only fulfill the earth, bring it to birth and blow where you will. Blow, blow, blow till I be but breath of the Spirit blowing in me. Spirit of God in the clear running water, blowing to greatness the trees on the hill. Spirit of God in the finger of morning, fill the earth, bring it to birth and blow where you will. Blow, blow, blow till I be but breath of the Spirit blowing in me.
Welcome to Spirit of Life. I'm Chris Field. Previously, I had the pleasure of interviewing Gary Bates on the subject of his book, The Alien Intrusion. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Gary back to the program to continue talking to us about issues of origin. So, Gary, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much.
Now, when we spoke some time back, you talked about the fact that your involvement now is specifically centred around helping people understand issues of origins and where we came from. Just explain to us what your role is again.
Well, I'm one of the writers and speakers at Creation Ministries International, and we're a non-denominational ministry, and we, if you like, are dedicated to upholding the veracity of the Bible. not only in just its terms of its theology, but in areas of science where it touches, if you like, the real world. One of the problems we have today, that even amongst the church, is that many Christians try to fit in, the millions of years of evolution, and maybe those days in Genesis aren't really 24-hour days, etc. But I think the problems that we see is, it leads you onto a slippery slope, as I found as a young Christian, to really not trusting the Bible. If you can't trust it in its very first book, then, how can you trust it when it talks about other issues and miracles and these types of things?
There is a perception that has been promoted, and I guess it's by anti-Christian people, that somehow Christianity and science just don't go together.
Yeah.
So how does that impact on what you do?
Yeah, well, they say that we're anti-science. Well, we're not anti-science at all. I work, as I mentioned in the program we did before, that I work with scientists all day. Some of these guys have been leading researchers in their field. All people have a view about where they came from, an origins view, a world view. And based upon that world view, you will always interpret science according to your world view. If I was to dig up a Tyrannosaurus leg bone out of the ground, it doesn't come with a label on it telling you how old it is. Now your viewers might be thinking, well, hang on, what about radiocarbon testing and all these types of things? Well, radiocarbon testing doesn't apply to things that are millions potentially years old. It can't work that way. But nonetheless, all you are measuring are chemicals, radioisotopes in your sample. You still have to have a belief about the past to determine how the quantity got there, how much got there, etc. So, science doesn't necessarily speak for itself. It's always interpreted in the light of your theory.
Well, the reason I've got you back on the program is because I know that you're well versed to answer a number of questions about the issues that are apparently challenging Christianity, issues because you confront them all the time, questions people have about if the Bible is true, what about? So because you're dealing with those sort of questions all the time, what would be some of the most common questions you get asked?
Well,
supposed scientific issues.
One would be, where did Cain get his wife, for example, But let me tell you the number one question we get today, and it's probably a lot to do with the political climate that we live in, and that is, if there's a God of love, why does he allow all the death and suffering in the world? I hark back to September 11. I don't remember God being so much in the media, because people, when tragedy strikes them, they say, why does God allow this? The first thing I'd say, Chris, is sadly, the majority of people alive today live their life as if God doesn't exist. And so it's a little bit unfair to start blaming him for bad things when it goes wrong. But, I think when I've spoken to Christians, or I've heard Christians try to give answers, they say, well, we don't know why these things happen, and, when we get to eternity, maybe we'll find out. I have to say, I don't think that's good enough. It wasn't good enough for me when I asked the questions of others, and it certainly didn't lead me, to fall on bended knee and worship God. I think, again, you take the Bible at face value, there is an answer. The Bible says that God created a very good world we wanted for nothing. There was no death, there was no suffering, if you like, before the first people, Adam and Eve. As a result of our rebellion, that's us living our lives as if God doesn't exist. This earth became cursed, this universe became cursed. The Bible just doesn't say it was human beings, it says the ground was cursed, the plants were cursed. That's why you get tsunamis, for example. That's why you get earthquakes, that's why you get cancers, because we're living in a cursed world. And there's nothing that you and I can do to escape from this dilemma or save ourselves. See, the implications are really, if the Bible's history, right back there in Genesis, is not true, if you like, if the book of Genesis is not real literal history, if there was no literally very good creation in the beginning, no literal Adam and Eve, no literal sin that brought literal death into the world, then you and I don't literally need to be saved from anything. See, the very, very reason Christ came to this earth was to overturn the effects of the curse, to save us, to redeem us.
And if he can't do that, then there's no real hope.
It's hopeless. Paul says, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, if, our preaching is in vain, it's foolishness. Only the Creator, only the Genesis Creator has the power to save us, when you think about it. Only the Creator can have the power to save us.
Okay, so now people would come to you then with questions, obviously, about fossils. You've written about UFOs. So of that catalogue of different questions that come to you, what are the ones that you find the most interesting?
I think the races issue. People say, well, if we've all come from two people, Adam and Eve, how come there are all the different races around?
Well, Gary, how come?
Well, races is a man-made term. You won't see the word races anywhere in the Bible. I'll give you an example. I was at a youth detention centre. I'd been asked by the chaplain there to give a talk to young detainees, and they protested at having to come and listen to this guy speak about Christian stuff. And it was quite intimidating, you know. There was a lot of young Aboriginal detainees there, and they turned their back on me as a protest. So there I was giving a lecture, a PowerPoint presentation. They had their chairs facing away from me. And I thought, well, how am I going to get these guys' attention? It wasn't working, and then suddenly I tapped one young man on the shoulder, a young Aboriginal fella, and I said, you know, mate, did you realise you and I have the same skin colour? And he snapped around quite angrily. He says, no, we don't. He said, I'm black and you're white. And I said, no, I'm not white. I said, actually, and I held my arm up against the projector screen, but maybe we can see here. See, my shirt is white. You can see my skin. My skin's not white. My skin is actually light brown. And I pointed that out to him, and I said, but your skin is dark brown. In fact, we have the same skin colour, if you like, or pigment, which is called melanin, and you just have a lot more of it than I have. And from there, I was actually able to show him that within a created humankind, if you like, you can get enormous variation of skin colours. Melanin is a natural sunscreen. When you think about it, after the flood, after the Tower of Babel, when God separated the people groups into languages, people would have gone off and spread about the earth. And people in hot climates who already had the genetic information, if you like, present to produce lots of melanin, have a natural resistance to sunscreen. They wouldn't suffer with skin cancers, etc., that, you know, so-called fair-skinned people suffer with. You put dark-skinned people in a cold environment, they suffer from vitamin D deficiency because they need more sunlight. So that's, if you like, natural selection. You know, we see that happening with animals around the world, that animals, you know, when the environment changes, what happens is our genes select from information that's already present to help us survive in that environment.
Okay, quickly then, you're going to force this question upon yourself. Isn't that evolution?
No, it is not.
So explain that.
Well, natural selection is a real phenomenon, but natural selection always selects from information that has to be present. If I could give an example, people know dogs. You go to the British Natural History Museum in London, and there's a display of dogs around there, and there's a sign saying about with the Darwinian display there, dogs prove evolution. Now we know, everybody knows, there are lots of different types of dogs. Is that evolution because we see all that change? Let me give you an example. If we wanted to do an experiment for fur length, natural selection experiment for fur lengthening dogs. So let's say we take two parent dogs and they're right in the middle range. They've got medium length fur. What that probably means is they've got a gene for long fur and a gene for short fur. Mum has. Dad's got a gene for long fur and Dad's got a gene for short fur. So they're right in that middle range. Now they can have offspring, and the offspring can be short-furred, medium-length furred, long-furred. What would happen with a short-furred dog? He'll have inherited a short-fur gene from Dad and a short-fur gene from Mum. Yeah. And the long-fur genes the same way. Now if the environment
actually lost information then, haven't they? They don't have the option then of swapping back over. Yeah.
Well, let me give you an example. If the environment changed and you had offspring with long fur, medium length and short fur, if the environment changed and suddenly got cold, which animals would survive the best? The ones with the long fur. But now they've only got genetic information to produce long fur, and all they'll ever produce is offspring with long fur. There's natural selection at work, but guess what? To get from pond scum to people, you've actually got to add genetic information, and what that natural selection example does, it shows that information is reduced.
And all it does is take away information that was in the whole pool in the first place. So that's not evolution then, it's simply selecting out a particular group.
Yeah, it's natural selection. It's a real phenomenon. It occurs in the real world, but is definitely not evolution. Evolutionists would say, look at all the change, but you can get change within a created kind. But the nearer you go back to creation, if you like, the more information those original created kinds possessed.
The richer their gene pool actually was. Well, Gary, there's probably a whole bunch of other things, and I'd like to get onto those, but what I think we should do right now is go for a bit of a break, and then we'll come back after this and talk about some of the other things that you've found in your involvement have been thorny issues for Christians or for non-believers alike that you have some answers to. So we'll be back in just a moment to talk some further with Gary Bates.
Spirit flowing in
Welcome back to Spirit of Life. I'm Chris Field. We have the pleasure of speaking with Gary Bates, the author of this fascinating book called Alien Intrusion, which we'll talk about again before the end of the program. But Gary, your involvement is to help Christians answer questions, hard questions, things that might otherwise stop them from really blossoming in their Christian faith. Without going into too many of the questions because time won't allow, what are some of the sort of questions that there are answers to on through the organisation that you work with?
Well, I mentioned a couple. Where did Cain get his wife? The origin of races. What about dinosaurs? How do you fit dinosaurs in the Bible, as some people say? What about distant starlight is one? We look in a universe where we see stars, we're told they're millions of light years away. How does that light reach us within a 6,000-year-old universe or something like that? Carbon dating, or other radiometric dating methods, those types of things. We've got answers, aliens and UFOs, for example. And our website, actually, the lead article changes daily. And it looks at issues that are going on in society. In fact, when the Sydney riots were on recently, what was that issue about? What are some of the underlying problems that cause those types of things? So just besides Bible science issues, it's really a worldview type issue, and it tries to delve into those bigger things and help Christians give answers to a range of different questions.
So just remind us then, the website was Answers?
No, it's creationontheweb.com.
Creationontheweb.com.
Yep.
Creationontheweb.com. And if people go there, they basically have a selection of lots of different things to choose from.
Yeah, click on the Info tab, Frequently Asked Questions, and there's over 4,500 searchable articles online that are free for people to download. The beauty is when you hear about, on TV, the latest ape-man find fossil in Africa.
Or a space rock or something else.
Yeah, you'll find within a couple of days we've got a response on our website. If you're getting hammered at work by those things, if you're a Christian, you can print out that response and give a solid biblical answer.
Now, you have said several times as we've talked to you about how the underlying view that you have about the world affects the way you interpret the information. It also affects the way you live. And I think that's fairly central to why you're doing what you're doing, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been confronted, particularly talking with non-Christians. They get offended. They see when you try to witness or talk to them that you're trying to push a whole bunch of rules down their throat. That's what people think about, sadly, many people think about Christianity. It's just a set of rules and regulations. Well, if I don't believe in God, well, why should I respond? Why should I follow your rules? I mean, I remember years ago, we've got a ministry called the Creation Bus, which tours around outback Australia. And we had him into this town. I was out there helping with a meeting, and 2 non-Christian kids were there, quite unruly, and they got ejected from the meeting. They were so bad. And I went outside and spoke to this young man, and I said, what do you think happens to you when you die? And he said, nothing. He said, they burn you up, put you in the ground, that's it. And I said, so you don't think there's any life after death, anything like that? No. I said, what about your meaning? Why are you here? And he said, there is no meaning. You and I are just here by chance, basically. And when you die, that's it. And the point of this story is, later on in the conversation, he said to me, so you don't own me, so why should I do what you tell me to do? Now, I'm not suggesting he sits there and he thinks, well, I'm the byproduct of chance random processes over millions and billions of years. You see, if we're taught it in an education system and the media reinforces this idea that, you and I are basically just a cosmic accident, rearranged stardust, and then some stage in the future, the universe is going to die out and there's no meaning or purpose. Well, it's a pretty hopeless situation. A country like Australia, Chris, has the second highest youth suicide rate in the developed world. And whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, I'm sure people watching, we're worried about the state of society, whether it's in this nation or others. Moral decay, homosexuality, abortion, lawlessness, crime rates are spiralling. We see these as the problems in society. I'd actually submit to viewers that they're not the problems, they're the symptoms of an underlying problem. The problem is sin, but the justification for sin and you doing what you want comes from the idea that there is no creator. There's nobody to be accountable to when you die. When you die, that's it, there's nothing. Humanism, which means basically man decides truth for himself, says there's no God, you can do what you like. What's the engine room behind humanism? Evolution. Evolution says everything made itself by chance.
So this breakdown that we see in our society, where it's just not as safe to live in any particular suburb now as it ever was before. You don't go away and leave the back door open, and you don't leave the keys in the car and the window down. That change of morality, you believe, has happened in Australia in our lifetime. We've observed it take place because of this origins issue.
I think so, yes. I think that people are not necessarily conscious of it. I think, like me, people don't even know that they have questions about this issue. When I first went to a meeting and I heard the information, I came out with all these questions. I actually didn't think they were a problem for me. I didn't know that they were questions that I had. But it started to unravel my own thinking, my own perceptions about my place in the world. And so that did affect my behaviour. I mean, ultimately, Chris, if you and I are Christians, we know that there's a very, very good reason why we shouldn't go and do wrong things. And I can remember, although I was brought up in a Christian environment at school, you know, in my teenage years, I was not a Christian. You know, I was out there with my mates and, like a lot of young people, doing wrong things. But because I was of that generation, you know, that where we sang hymns and said prayers at school, I remember lying in my bed at night after, you know, having done a couple of wrong things, thinking, I wonder if God saw me. See, it never left me. And a lot of people who are responding today to the message of Jesus, you know, just believe in Jesus, are people who've had that foundation laid in their childhood. But there are generations that don't have that foundation today.
So you would believe that one of the best ways to help Australia 20, 30, 40 years from now would be to actually bring people, young and old, back to recognising we were created and not evolved.
Absolutely.
You think that would affect our morals?
Yes, I do. I mean, let's understand the Bible says that we are born sinners. And, you know, even though we're Christians, we don't profess to be perfect. We war against our flesh. But the point is, we know that there's a higher calling and purpose and meaning to our life. Yeah, if I could break it down like this, if there is a God who created this incredible universe that we see, billions and billions of galaxies out there with billions of stars in them, when I look at the incredible complexity of life and look at the DNA and say, this infinitely wise, super intelligence creator that is worthy of my worship. You know, I don't believe there can be any higher calling in our life than to come into contact with the Creator. How can there be any higher calling or purpose than finding out why I'm here, what is the purpose and meaning of my existence? And you know, when I talk about that same Creator, it just boggles me, staggers me, that He would leave heaven. He would take the form of a human being so you and I can understand Him. You know, the Bible says in Hebrews that when you're looking at Jesus, He is the exact representation of God. If you want to know what God was like in the flesh, look at Jesus, that's what you're seeing. And what did we see about the character of Jesus? He tried to overturn the effects of the curse. He healed people, He loved, but He always spoke the truth. He was uncompromising. And you know, He also said, and this is, you know, where I sort of disagree with this postmodern movement that we've got to water down the message somehow. You know, Jesus spoke the truth. He said, you know, and you shall know the truth and it will set you free.
Well, Gary, let me make an observation here, though. Some of the viewers that are watching the program will have relatives, children, grandchildren, family and friends whose morality really is going to pieces. And they're not going to listen to the advice given by their family friends, their caring Christian friends. Books like your Alien Intrusion or the other resources from your ministry would probably be very, very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, you know, UFOs and aliens is just one subject to engage people. You know, as I've mentioned before, most people, when they're witnessing to others, will take a step back if you mention Jesus, God or the Bible. So, you know, if you want to tell somebody, for example, you believe that God created in 6 literal 24-hour days about 6,000 years ago, I think you'll have a conversation on your hands quicker than you know.
But what resources could you put in the hands of people who were trying to help someone else who was not listening?
Well, the number one resource, the one resource that we get more life-changing testimonies out from anything else is Creation Magazine. The Creation Magazine is 56 pages, full colour, no paid advertising. Every page is dedicated to information and witnessing. And you know, it's produced in Australia. It goes to over 140 countries around the world, Chris. 140 countries posted from Australia.
And this is scientific information?
Well, it's family-oriented information. There's a children's section in it. Talks about gives the type of answers that we've been discussing here today. But what it does, because it's a glossy magazine, people are not threatened by it. It gets under the radar. You know, I had one of my colleagues, he was in New Zealand. It was a fantastic story there, and a young couple had been trying to talk to a policeman friend of theirs. And he'd resisted all attempts. And he said, I'm not interested. I'm pleased for you and your Christian faith. So one night they asked him to come and babysit the children. And they removed the TV and all the reading literature out of the house and just left Creation magazines lying around. So what else was he going to do? So they came home, and this was the story they told us. They came home and he said to them, yeah, the kids were fine. And by the way, I read those magazines like you wanted me to. And he said, have you got any more information?
Wow.
Found it fascinating. 2 weeks later, he gave his life to the Lord. So that's what we find. It really, see, you've got to shake people's foundational worldview.
Well, listening to a speaker could also help. I mean, that helped you. So you have speakers coming through all the time?
Yeah, we've got 11 speakers that travel around. We do, as I said before, we do about 600 events. If people are interested in having a speaker at their church, contact Creation Ministries International, and they can go to our website at creationontheweb.com. There's a Contact Us page, and there's even a ministry request form.
What about a program? Can they find out who the speakers are that are coming through now? Is there some sort of calendar of speakers?
Yes, we've got an events calendar on our website. You can look on those tabs. It says events, look down. We're regularly in Melbourne and all the capital cities of Australia.
So people could easily either get materials or bring a friend along to hear a speaker.
Sure.
Simply, as you say, to sort of open their thinking, get their mind opened up on how those things work. And obviously it worked for you, made a big difference to you.
It did, and even with this subject of UFOs and aliens, I find that it's bringing people into the church that would never normally come. Sometimes they're confronting, and sometimes they get confronted. But the thing is, it's challenging. We really do need to shake the foundations if people, and get them out of their comfort zone to some extent, if they're going to consider eternal things.
And it does seem too, sadly, that a lot of Christians don't even give as much thought to some of these things as they should.
Well, our culture's changed, and that's the reason. Gone are the days when we could just preach Jesus, as I said to the generation that went to Sunday school like you and I. Sadly, Jesus has become a swear word, and you talk to young people today and they have no idea who he is. So we've got to lay that foundation all the way back to Genesis, I believe, as I mentioned before. And it makes logical, coherent sense when we can lay that foundation and understand the very reason that Christ came.
Well, Gary, thank you very, very much for giving us that information, filling us in on this. I think it's important for people that are Christians to be able to realise they can help their friends and they can use this material. So, friends, if you'd like to know more about the alien intrusion or the other materials that Gary's been talking about, you'll find that as creationontheweb.com. It's been our pleasure to have Gary Bates as our guest, and it's our pleasure to have you viewing with us. We look forward to seeing you next time.